So imagine you're running a marathon.
right,
You are just pushing your absolute limits. You're sweating, your lungs are totally burning, but you're keeping a solid pace.
you're in the zone.
Exactly, you're in the zone. And suddenly, you hear footsteps right behind you. And you brace yourself, thinking, okay, someone is about to edge past me.
Uh-huh.
But when you look over your shoulder, you realize it's actually the person in first place. And they aren't just, like, passing you. They've completed an entire extra lap of the stadium and are coming up right behind you to pass you for the second time.
Oh, man. That is brutal.
Right. In an instant, that whole illusion that you're just, running a bit slow, it completely shatters.
It forces this total recalculation of your reality because you aren't just behind at that point. You are participating in a fundamentally different race than the leader.
Exactly. And, when we look at the current state of the global AI and digital economy, traditional spreadsheets and like GDP reports, they don't really capture that visceral, terrifying feeling.
No, they really don't.
But language does. So today, we are taking a deep dive into how Japanese media, we're talking major financial outlets like Nikkei, policy papers, business analysts, how they are currently describing Japan's position in this fierce U.S., China, and Japan tech dynamic.
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective shift.
It really is. Because for anyone listening, whether you're an advanced Japanese language learner prepping for the JLPT and wanting to understand, like, the high-level vocabulary of corporate Tokyo, or you just want this razor-sharp lens to view global tech geopolitics, there is one central word that acts as the ultimate aha moment.
Yep.
And that word is Shukai Okure.
Shukai Okure. It is just a remarkable piece of vocabulary. I mean, to really grasp the cultural and, well, the economic weight behind how business leaders use this term right now, we kind of have to look at the anatomy of the word itself.
Let's do it. Break it down for us.
So Shukai Okure is constructed from a very specific set of kanji. The first part, shu, it means around or allow.
Okay, left.
Right. Then we have kai, which basically operates as a counter for times or occurrences.
So we are firmly establishing this concept of lapse on a track.
Precisely. And then the final piece is okur, which derives from the verb okurero, meaning to lag, to be delayed, or to just fall behind.
Okay, so you put it all together, and the literal translation is basically that brutal marathon scenario we just talked about.
Exactly. It literally means being completely lapped by the leader on a circular track. And, what makes this so significant from a linguistic standpoint is the conscious choice by the media to use this specific metaphor over much more common alternative.
Right, because, if I'm studying Japanese and I just want to say my train is delayed or my project is behind schedule, I just use a standard phrase, right? Like, okurete iru.
Yeah, you would. Okurete iru simply means is late or is lagging. But you rarely see financial journalists use that generic phrase when they're analyzing the AI race right now.
Why is that?
Because okurete iru implies a linear path. It suggests that, with a little extra effort or maybe by skipping a coffee break, you can just catch up to the person walking a few paces ahead of you.
Oh, I see. It's like, I'm just a few steps behind, I'll jog a bit, and I'll be right there with you.
Exactly. But business media deliberately avoids that phrase because it completely fails to capture the structural reality of the situation. By choosing Shukai Okure, the media is making this profound cultural admission. They're saying the fundamental nature of the competition has shifted.
The track itself is different.
Right. And those traditional methods of catching up, they are no longer mathematically viable.
That distinction between a linear path and a circular track is just fascinating. Let's pull that thread into the actual dynamics of the AI race, because we are looking at this three-way dynamic, right? The US, China, and Japan. Why does this track and field metaphor map so perfectly onto the reality of generative AI development?
Well, the sources point to three main reasons. First, the dynamic nature of it. The first thing to understand is that AI development is relentless. It is not a static infrastructure project.
Right, it's not like building a bridge.
Exactly. Building a national highway system has a clear finish line. Once it's paved, the gap is closed, AI, on the other hand, is this continuous high-speed rally. The track is always moving.
Wow.
So by framing this as a racing sport rather than a construction project, the language injects this sense of ongoing, inescapable motion. The race doesn't just stop because a company needs to like restructure its corporate hierarchy.
Right. The other runners keep running while you're tying your
Oh,
shoes.
exactly. And the second reason is the sheer magnitude of the gap. We are talking about compute power, large language models, the entire app ecosystem. The sources make it clear that Japan isn't just trailing 10 meters behind the US and Chinese tech giants.
They've been lapped.
They have completed a full lap. The gap is massive.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If we're accepting the premise of a race, even a continuous one, where you've been lapped by a full 400 meters, technically speaking, you are still on the same physical track, right? So if Japan recognizes they're a lap behind these tech giants, why can't they just sprint? Like throw billions of yen at the problem, hire way more engineers, work longer hours, and eventually just close the distance?
That is the logical question, but that sprint strategy assumes a linear progression of technology. Which brings us to the third and most important reason this word works so well, and that's the core mechanism of the AI gap, the compound acceleration effect.
The compound acceleration effect. Okay, break that down.
Well, AI isn't like human running, where the leader eventually fatigues. In the artificial intelligence space, the further ahead you are, the faster you move.
Because you are utilizing the very technology you're building to build the next iteration of the technology.
Exactly. Just consider how large language models, LLMs, are developed. American and Chinese companies are deploying their current highly advanced AI models to write more efficient code for the next model.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they use them to optimize the thermal dynamics of their massive data centers and even to accelerate their own silicon research. They possess these colossal data ecosystems that feed back into their models, creating an insurmountable data moat.
So it's like compound interest.
Yes, they are earning compound interest on their innovation speed.
So a U.S. tech giant isn't just running faster. They've essentially built a motorcycle while they were running, and now they're using that motorcycle to build a bullet train.
That is a mechanical reality. The speed of iteration is purely exponential. If a domestic Japanese firm is Shukai Okure a lap behind and they rely on traditional software development cycles, that gap doesn't just remain static.
It grows.
It actively, aggressively widens every single day. The leaders pull further away simply by virtue of already being in the lead.
I want to share a specific sentence from the business analysis we reviewed for this deep dive, because it really grounds this entirely. It's exactly the kind of phrasing an advanced Japanese learner would encounter in a high-level corporate briefing.
Oh, let's hear it.
The English translation is, Japan is completely a lap behind the U.S. and China in generative AI development. And the Japanese phrasing used in the media is, Nihon wa shizi AI no kahatu ni oite. Just
notice the tone of that phrasing. It is entirely neutral. It's objective.
Yeah, it doesn't sound panicked.
Right. There is no sensationalism. There's no finger-pointing at specific CEOs or politicians. It is an impartial, almost clinical observation of the global playing field. The media uses this vocabulary to impart a really sober reality to the public and to stakeholders.
So it's like ripping the Band-Aid off.
Exactly. It forces a reckoning. You cannot strategize a comeback if you are still pretending you are merely a few strides behind.
It's a completely unvarnished look in the mirror, which, naturally forces us to ask the million-dollar question, how did this happen? Because we are talking about Japan. This is the undisputed, terrifyingly dominant tech king of the 1980s and 90s. The country that gave us the Walkman. They dominated global semiconductor memory. They basically defined consumer electronics. If they had been lapped today, how did they get stuck running so slowly in the first place?
To answer that, we really have to examine the vocabulary of systemic lag, because the media frequently pairs Shukai Okure with two other critical high-level terms that explain this structural decay.
Okay, let's get into those. What's the first one?
The first is Dejitaru Haizen.
Dejitaru Haizen. Digital defeat. I mean, defeat carries a tremendous amount of historical gravity in Japanese culture.
It does. Using the word Haizen, which is most strongly associated with the end of World War II, it indicates a collapse on a national systemic scale.
Wow.
So when analysts use Dejitaru Haizen, they are talking about the comprehensive failure of digital transformation, what they commonly refer to in Japanese business as DX.
So this isn't just about, like, one single tech company missing a product launch.
No, not at all. This describes a foundational failure across both government administration and corporate architecture. It's the failure to transition from analog, paper-based workflows to integrated digital ecosystems.
I mean, this makes total sense when you look at the friction in their systems. It was only, very recently that the Japanese government finally phased out the requirement for businesses to submit official data on floppy disks.
Yes. Floppy disks.
And fax machines remained a massive staple in offices way, way after the rest of the world moved to the cloud.
And that friction is exactly the point. Artificial intelligence requires massive, clean, integrated data sets to function. If your corporate architecture is siloed across localized servers and you're reliant on physical Hanko stamps for approval and fragmented by incompatible legacy databases,
You just can't move fast.
you cannot deploy an LLM effectively. The foundational layer required for modern software development was fundamentally fractured.
So it's really not a talent issue. The engineers in Japan are brilliant, but the infrastructure they're being asked to build the AI upon is essentially crumbling beneath their feet.
Exactly, it's structural. And furthermore, even when they did innovate incredibly well, they fell victim to a phenomenon described by our second critical vocabulary word,
Which is
Galapagosika.
Galapagosization. I love this term because it perfectly bridges evolutionary biology and corporate strategy.
It really is brilliant. The mechanism of Galapagosica is tech isolation. The concept draws directly from Charles Darwin's observations of the Galapagos Islands, right? Where species evolved in these highly specialized ways because they were completely isolated from the mainland.
Okay, so how does that apply to the boardroom?
Well, in a business context, Japanese tech companies spent the 2000s creating wildly advanced products exclusively for their domestic market.
Oh, like the feature phones. I remember this. Before the iPhone even existed, Japanese flip phones had digital wallets. They could stream television. They had these advanced email networks.
Yeah.
They were just hyper-evolved.
They were. But they evolved without any regard for global standards or interoperability.
Ah.
They were optimized entirely for the unique ecosystem of Japanese consumers and local telecom carriers. So when the borders of the digital world opened up, when smartphones and global app ecosystems like iOS and Android became the standard, those hyper-evolved Japanese products couldn't survive in the global market.
They couldn't communicate with the rest of the world's software.
Precisely.
Let me try an analogy here to tie this back to our track and field metaphor from earlier. Galapagosization is like spending a decade perfecting the absolute greatest hurdles technique the world has ever seen.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right, you train in secret, your form is flawless, your timing is impeccable, but when you finally step into the global stadium, you realize the rest of the world agreed to run a 100-meter sprint on a flat track.
Exactly.
Your skills are incredibly evolved, but they are entirely useless for the actual event taking place.
That captures the tragedy of it perfectly. It's an evolution into a dead end. So when you synthesize these two concepts, the internal infrastructural collapse of digital defeat and the external isolation of Galapagosization, you really begin to see the architecture of Shukai Okure.
The lap behind.
Right. You get lapped because you spent 20 years running on a completely different track, while the US and China built a unified global superhighway for software and data.
Okay, we have painted a decidedly grim picture here. A fragmented infrastructure, isolated technology, and this compounding exponential gap. I mean, if you are reading the Nikkei over your morning coffee, this feels like a scenario where you just fold the paper and give up.
It does sound bleak.
But this deep dive isn't just an autopsy. The analysts and policymakers in the sources we reviewed, they do have a strategy for a comeback.
Yeah.
And true to form, there's a specific, powerful vocabulary word for this maneuver.
Yes. The discourse right now is heavily focused on the concept of makikaishi.
Makikaishi, which means a rollback, a counterattack, or like a massive comeback.
And you will frequently see it deployed in one complete mobilizing phrase in these policy papers. Shukai Okure no makikaishi.
A counterattack from being a lap behind.
Exactly. This term is crucial because it dictates the scale of the response. A makikashi is not some subtle course correction.
Right.
It isn't a quarterly initiative to boost sales by 5%. It implies the recognition of a severe, almost existential disadvantage. It requires the mobilization of unprecedented resources to shift the entire paradigm of the battle.
But how do you actually execute a counterattack against an exponential software lead? I mean, you just talked about how the US and China have insurmountable data moats and LLMs that are building better LLMs. Where is the vulnerability there? What does a makikaishi actually look like in practice?
According to the sources, it looks like a massive pivot from software to hardware. Specifically, the Japanese government is executing this counterattack through aggressive, heavily funded semiconductor subsidies.
Oh. Okay, that is a fascinating strategic pivot. So if you've decisively lost the software lap, you try to establish total dominance over the physical track those software programs require to run.
That is the core logic. Think about it. You cannot train a massive AI model, and you certainly can't run the millions of daily queries required by generative AI apps without access to highly advanced microchips.
Right, the actual physical hardware.
The physical layer is the ultimate choke point. So by pouring billions of dollars into semiconductor subsidies, revitalizing domestic hardware initiatives like Rapidus,
Yeah, I'm seeing those headlines.
and heavily incentivizing global foundry giants like TSMC to build massive fabrication plants in places like Kumamoto, Japan is attempting to leverage its historical strength in precision manufacturing and material science.
They are essentially trying to build the toll booth on the AI superhighway.
Mm.
Like, even if American or Chinese companies write the absolute best code, they eventually have to pay the toll to access the physical compute power required to execute that code.
Precisely. If they can secure a critical node in the global semiconductor supply chain, they create a geopolitical and economic dependency. And that offsets their software lag.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is a highly expensive, high-risk gambit. Building semiconductor foundries takes years, it takes billions of dollars, and the global competition for hardware supremacy is just as fierce right now.
Everyone wants those chips.
But when you are a lap behind, standard strategies fail. You have to change the choke point of the race.
That is such a powerful framework. And, I want to turn this directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Step away from geopolitics for a second and just look at your own industry, your company, or even your personal skill set.
Yeah, bring it home.
Look at the disruptions happening right now with automation or changing market demands. Are you just behind? Or taking a weekend course or working a bit harder can close the gap? Or have you been completely lapped? Are you experiencing your own Shukai Okure? And if you recognize that you are on the wrong track, what kind of massive internal intervention, what personal makikashi would it take to change your own choke points and regain your leverage?
That application is exactly why these linguistic concepts are so valuable. For advanced language learners, mastering terms like Shukai Okure or Garapagosuka goes far beyond passing a proficiency test.
Totally.
It gives you the cultural key to unlock the mindset of a boardroom. It allows you to read between the lines of global economic news and understand the urgency, the fear, and the sheer strategic ambition that's driving these billion-dollar policies.
Absolutely. Today we took a deep dive into the vocabulary of systemic competition. By unpacking just a handful of terms, Shukai Okure for being brutally lapped, Dejitaru Haizen for the foundational collapse of digital infrastructure, Garapagosuka for the trap of hyper-isolated evolution, and Makikashi for the massive hardware-driven counterattack, we really got a masterclass in the realities of the global AI race.
We did. We stripped away the generic tech buzzwords to reveal the structural hurdles and the sheer scale of the fight happening right now.
Yeah, and when you understand the vocabulary, the news stops being just this disjointed series of events.
Exactly. When you see a headline tomorrow about Japan subsidizing a new microchip plant, you won't just see an industrial policy. You will see a culture fighting tooth and nail to execute a makikaishi from a Shukai Okure position. It brings the economic data to life.
Which brings me to one final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. We spent a lot of time discussing the compound acceleration effect, this terrifying reality that in the realm of artificial intelligence, the leaders naturally and exponentially widen their lead simply by utilizing the technology they've already built.
Right, the widening gap.
The gap grows regardless of how hard the trailing runners push. So if this AI technology continues to iterate at an exponential rate, does a race eventually stop being a competition entirely?
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
At what point in our near future does being lapped become a permanent, mathematically irreversible state? And if we reach a threshold where catching up is no longer humanly or economically possible, how will our cultures have to adapt our language to describe a world where the race has already been permanently won?
It forces us to question whether our current competitive metaphors are built for an exponential future or if they are just artifacts of a linear past.
Someday soon, the vocabulary of the track and field might just fail us entirely. Keep exploring, keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.